Tallboys and Trackmasters is brought to you by Expert Exhaust. Expect more for your money. And by Cycle Mart, your motorcycle parts store. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to episode 31 of Tallboys
and Trackmasters.
My favorite part of the week.
What's with the get up, buddy?
I got to be safe in the garage. You know, there's lots of stuff flying around here these days. Got lots of projects coming down the pipe. And
yeah, there's a lot coming down the pipe. That I'm sure of.
How was your weekend, bub?
Well, no complaints. Beautiful weather. I was glad to see that you guys had a successful cleanup. Some airtime on the local news, courtesy of Dan's daughter. So that's pretty cool.
World famous now. Yeah, it was a good time. Had, I think in total, counting the conservation officers and everybody that showed up too, we had like 22, 23 people. Nice. Good ride over there to the place and a good ride afterwards. Yeah, we got like 317 pounds of trash and junk out of that trail, and
nice.
It's amazing to see, you know, just how far up that water gets on that shoreline up there at Tiger Lake, and just the junk that's up there, man.
Yeah,
on that,
there's been several times I went out there in winter after it's been drained or whatever.
Yeah,
it's crazy how low it is.
Yeah, it's really low right now. Most of the boats are out of the water. I was cracking up because that back patio deck that they let us take our pictures at and put the banners and everything up. When we got done, I went back there and I was taking the banners off, and I hear a two-stroke just, I mean, going as fast as it can possibly go. Just red line, guts thrown apart, you know? And I'm like, what in the hell is that? And I look around and I see down on the lake, there's a dock about the size of my garage being pulled by something. I'm like, well, it's not pulling it very well, but I can't see through the trees over there what it is. But finally, I see a gap and it comes through, and it's like the world's smallest wave runner, old school two-stroke. We're talking like you know, mid 80s, maybe early or late 70s, and it's just that thing. It wasn't working very well.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Something I've always wanted to do is when the water's low is ride around that lake.
Yeah,
I've always wanted to do it.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome. But you probably end up like a lot of those people out at Lake Mead that when the water was really low last year that tried to drive down in there. It looks dry, but it's all just muck and mud that's been underwater for years.
Yep. Yeah, I know somebody that was dumb enough to take a 1998 Toyota 4Runner a little bit too far past the end of the concrete dock when he was in college, when the water was real low down there. So don't think it's all dry just because it looks dry. But yeah, I'd love at some point to be able to ride a bike around that or something. That'd be sweet.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, kind of speaking of water, that's a good segue into tonight's episode. We're going to talk about solutions if you get yourself stranded. I'd like to preface this by saying, you know, I think we've kind of beat a dead horse talking about how, you know, you need to make sure that you have the proper tools with you. It's probably not a good idea to ride solo if you're going to do some, you know, pretty aggressive type of dual sporting, you know, water crossings or some technical hard trails. So, you know, obviously before this episode, you know, you should be fairly self-sufficient and prepared with the proper tools and enough spare parts to get you going. But I mean, sometimes that's not always the case. And hopefully tonight's episode may help you guys out a little bit if you find yourself in one of these situations. But yeah, the first thing, let's talk about, getting your bike completely waterlogged. You're doing a creek crossing, a deep water mud hole, and the thing goes down underneath the water and shuts off. So I know we experienced this with you earlier this year back on Kingsville, and let's take everybody kind of through what we did for your situation there.
So mine wasn't because I dropped it. Mine was because I tried to baby it through it a little bit too much, and then didn't carry momentum, came to a stop, and that wave that you carry with you went right up my air box, right into the intake, and bogged my bike out. And I had several guys around me telling me, I'll just start it, ride it out of there. I was like, nope, we're pushing it. So of course I was in like knee deep water, and got it out to the other side, fully expecting that it was toast, but took the spark plug and stuff out, which is kind of a pain to do on a KTM because you have to take off the gas tank. In order to do that, you got to take the plastics off the front. And then the spark plug's not easy to get out of there, and it's way down in a little hole, and you got to move wiring looms out of the way and everything else. And I shot about a bottle cap full of water out of that thing. And luckily, this was all done in a 10-minute span after that had happened. So no signs of oil contamination, anything like that. And that was pretty early on in the day. We turned around, did a lot more riding. Of course, I stopped and checked periodically to make sure that there was no foaming or, milky looking oil or anything. But in hindsight, it's a good story. At the time, I was adding up my mind what a total rebuild was going to cost, like what my options were and everything. Yeah. I was fortunate there. If I'd tried to start that bike, chances of it having bent something, valve, con rod, etc., were probably pretty high. So
I was very surprised. I was one of the guys that was probably in the background, like, fire it up, it'll be fine. But whenever we went through the whole process of tearing that thing down, taking the plug out, as soon as you hit the starter to crank it over, like, I was very surprised about how much water came out of that thing, both out the exhaust and out of the spark plug hole. So I don't think that water would have compressed very well inside the engine, and it definitely would have
last I checked, or at least when I was getting my engineering degree, they stated that water was a virtually non-compressible fluid. So that's also the last time I ran no-toil air filter oil, because if you're a no-toil guy, if you ever notice, water goes through that like it's not even there. I never had an issue with it collecting dirt and dust or anything like that. It was fine for that. But comparing that to like a properly oiled, like petroleum-based filter oil, there was a night and day difference.
Yeah.
Chances of that having happened had I had just standard petroleum-based air filter oil on there, it's probably greatly reduced. But yeah, you don't like to see water come out of somewhere it's not supposed to be in. But
no.
I mean, I haven't noticed any loss in performance or anything, and that was pretty early on in the riding season this year.
Yep. I know, maybe one piece of advice that we can give, that if you find yourself forced to do some type of deep water crossing like that, and you do choose to ride it through, I would say, without a doubt, make sure you got your hand on the kill button or your key switch, some ways or means to turn the thing off.
Yep.
And as soon as you start going across and you find yourself in that situation where you're going to be going down and going over and getting absolutely just drowned and soaked.
Yep.
We should definitely shut that off before it hits the water. It's going to do, the most good that it possibly can.
Yep. I agree completely.
4-strokes, are very, very, very suspect when it comes to that type of thing, water going into the combustion cylinder. I know, 2-strokes are slightly more forgiving, but, still water's no good inside of any type of engine like that. And I would definitely recommend doing exactly what we did, tear the thing down, get your spark plug out, take your air filter out, shake it out, dry it out the best that you possibly can. I know, like on the KTMs and a lot of these new EFI bikes that have the quick disconnects for the fuel line going into the throttle body, do like we did too, where we took a little bit of oil and lubed up that O-ring before.
Definitely lubricate that O-ring. Honestly, if you ride KTM, you should be carrying spare connector O-rings anyway, but definitely lubricate that. Ideally, I would have had a pickup truck come get my bike like as soon as possible, but having ridden for a while, seen zero milkiness in the oil, and it takes a pretty small amount of water emulsified in oil for it to start looking milky.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got home, oil change while it was still hot. And I even went through the trouble of cutting the filter open to see if there was any like additional metal particulate between the pleats of the filter. Didn't notice anything like that. So definitely got lucky. A lot of people don't get so fortunate. A lot of people's immediate reaction to when a motor starts to bog is just grab a big handful of throttle and rev that thing to the moon. And you get that much inertia in your rotating assembly in your motor and suck some water in there. It is an immediate bent rod. That's just all there is to it.
Yep.
So another thing too is just not panicking. I mean, of course, when I first did it, I was pretty panicked, but once the gravity of it set in, like, well, this is where we're at now. It's like, get the tank off, get the plug out, see where this thing's at. And another thing too, especially on KTMs, is take your time and thread your spark plug in by hand until you're absolutely sure that you've got several good threads in there before you even touch it with a wrench, because it's in there at a pretty odd angle and it's fine thread and it's easy to strip.
Yeah.
So carry a spark plug tool if you're going to do any amount of water crossing, period. Spark plug tool, spare spark plug would be great. I know that we had a guy on the 304 detour this year that didn't have a spark plug tool for a KTM, which we can touch on in a little bit. But the thing is having seen multiple people ride through it, you think, oh, I'm good. But in my instances, I just didn't have the commitment and momentum. And, that can be just as bad as too much commitment for a water crossing.
I would say too, you were speaking about the 304 detour incident there, know your limitations about how much water you sucked in. I mean, if it's obvious that, it was running when it hit the ground and it definitely sucked in a bunch of water, I mean, at that point, your motor is probably most likely done and needs a rebuild.
Yep.
But, there's a fine line between taking the chance of trying to fire it up and get it going again, or doing like we did, trying to dry it out and keep going. I know that guy, he was going across one of the creek crossings down at White Day Creek, about halfway up the creek, probably in the worst possible spot that you could try to get a bike in and out of. But luckily the people were nice enough at the end of the road. They had a nice Can-Am side-by-side and utility quad. Was able to go out there and kind of help get the thing loaded up and hauled back to the end of the road. And by the time they got to the end of the road, their other buddy had already rode back up to camp and got the van, got the bike back up to camp. They changed the oil and did a bunch of stuff there and got it fired right back up and running again. And he rode the Easy Loop with us the next day, and the bike was completely fine. So they went very careful, very cautious, and a little overboard to make sure it was done correctly.
You will not kick yourself for having taken too many precautions on a drown bike. You will absolutely kick yourself for immediately bumping the starter. Ideally, you'd have a kickstart bike where you could kind of feel out,
slowly.
I feel like suddenly that I've come up to something incompressible. You can take and put a non-kickstart bike on its side, or have a couple of your buddies hold the back wheel up, put it in like sixth gear, and then just real gently turning the rear wheel forward to get that engine to cycle over. And if you come up to a point where you feel like it's like it's incompressible, then obviously you've got some issues. Maybe you'll get lucky if you got an auto decomp. You'll get it kind of when it's in between cycles or whatever, that decomp's engaged, you'll spit some of that water out of the exhaust valves. But yeah, always an oil change is a given. You're good. Change a spark plug if you can, because those can start causing weird things if you get them wet. And I don't know.
I know
it's hard to expect the unexpected.
Yeah. Well, I think with water crossings though, like for the most part, they don't really sneak up on you. I mean, you kind of know they're coming, or you have enough of a sight line to know, hey, this might be a situation that I'm going to have to potentially deal with. I know that one of the last scenarios that I remember running into when we were a kid, my sister used to have a DS80, and we were riding up to Fort Hill. And where we lived there in Barrackville, we kind of cut down through Chesapeake. And it's kind of like how we do now, where we go down past the Rich Station and go across Buffalo Creek right there to get up onto the trail. So we were coming across that same crossing. And my sister had just kind of gotten to the point where she could really start riding on her own without needing a whole lot of help. And the water wasn't really that deep that day, but she went through in the deepest part of the whole creek, fell over, and completely just submerged that little DS80. And that's kind of where I learned the first tips of the trade about how to unwaterlog a bike, because Dad ran out there, got the thing. We got it on the other side of the creek onto the beach, flipped it upside down, pulled the spark plug out, like you said, put it in high gear and sat there, just kept running the tire. And it puked out water forever out of that little thing. Once it stopped doing that, I think one of us had a backpack on, had a little bit of WD-40. We sprayed down inside the cylinder there, flipped it back up, took a lighter, dried the spark plug out as best as we could, put it back together, kicked it 5 or 6 times. It burbled and spit and sputtered because it had a bunch of water still in the carburetor and everything. But it took back off, ran fine the rest of the day, changed the oil when we got to the house, and that thing probably still running to this day.
Those bikes were hard to kill.
Like I said, two-strokes in general are a little more forgiving when it comes to that type of stuff. So,
say you've waterlogged your bike, you've went through the precautions, you've gotten it home, done your oil change, etc. My advice from that point is, if it's running well, go out and run the guts out of it. Get it hot. Get it real. Just run that engine like you stole it for a little bit. Get your temps up. You want any amount of moisture that's still hiding out in there, and since oil and water don't mix, it will be hiding out in places. You want to get all that vaporized and kind of burned out of your motor. You don't want to change the oil and then just let it sit in the garage for 3-4 weeks until you ride it again, because any amount of moisture on the surfaces for your cams, your followers, anything really is not ideal. So after I got my oil changed, I turned around and took it for a good long ride, made sure it was up to temp, and haven't had any issues since. So better yet, it's just not to treat your Austrian bike like an Austrian U-boat.
I think you got the nickname of Durnitz after that, didn't you?
Or Aquaman.
All right. Well, I think that's great advice, and hopefully it helps some guys out if you have to deal with any type of water issues with your bike. Let's move on to the next one, which is, kind of a generalization, but can definitely happen. It didn't happen to me several times, and that's just, you're out riding along, having a good time, and the bike just shuts off and it refuses to start back up. So let's kind of go through the diagnostic process here of figuring out why it did that, and what you might be able to do to MacGyver it back into running condition. So I think it behoove us to start and talk about, what I like to refer to as the KISS system. Keep it simple, stupid. Let's check all the stupid stuff first. Does it have gas? Did you run out of gas?
Ain't got no gas in it.
Ain't got no gas in it. Don't immediately go to the worst case scenario. Like, it's locked up. I blew the bike up. There's no compression.
Don't be the guy that runs it out of gas and it's like, oh, jump time, bike's toast.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, it's something really stupid. And I mean, obviously, any type of internal combustion engine requires 3, and I would say 3.5 things in order for it to run. And that's fuel, that's spark, compression, and a little subparagraph timing. It needs to be in time for that thing to happen.
But that falls into compression.
Right.
Step one is, does your starter work?
Yeah.
Chances, I mean, I've seen starters burn out, but more often than that, I've seen the contacts on starter buttons get corroded and fail, or I've seen, a kill switch, the contacts on it get messed up several times. Your kickstand switch, we were out riding and had a guy experience that with a Tenere. Sean's Tenere had the kickstand switch failed because a rock came up and hit it.
Yep.
And had messed it up. And, if it cranks but doesn't start, I would start with making sure you have spark.
Yep. I
would check to see what state your air filter is in. If you're one of the guys that hasn't cleaned your air filter since, the Reagan administration. Pretty much all bikes are CDI now. Nobody's out there rocking a bike that still uses points or anything like that.
Yeah.
If you have a bike that's prone to CDI issues, like some of the Honda XRs, that's a possibility. But for the most part, the ignition system on bikes is pretty robust these days.
Mm-hmm.
You guys that run carbureted bikes, you have a little something messed up in your pilot jet or whatever that won't let it start. Fuel injected guys, it can be an issue with fuel mapping, but chances of that are somewhat lower than that of a carburetor.
Yeah.
Compression is really one of the things that I typically don't even think about because I don't have the means to check it aside from putting the bike in gear and pushing it and seeing if I'm getting resistance or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, obviously one of the easiest things to do, and this goes along kind of with what we just talked about being able to pull your spark plug out.
Yeah.
Pull the plug out and, ground it against the engine, kick it over, hit the starter, whatever, what have you, to see if you have a nice, healthy looking spark going across the contacts on the spark plug.
I'll tell you, another thing is if you're borrowing your buddy's rat bike, you're going to ride it out to the end of the road. He insists that you ride this thing, right? You get out to the end of the road, the thing just sputters and dies, is to make sure, A, the fuel is on, and B, the dual carburetors are not both choked.
It's analog, baby. It's analog.
It's analog, all right.
Yeah, I ran into a situation there. I was about a year and a half ago riding the XR650R. Just kind of going through my normal routine, riding around. I went to work that day, was doing a little bit of riding right after work, just stuff off of Halleck. Decided to go down through Weirton Mine, was going out towards Goshen Roadside. And I got almost to the very end of the road, came up over this rise and come down the other side, and the bike just shut off. And I'm like, well, that was very weird, kick, nothing. Tried to drift start it. I was on the top of a hill, so I had plenty of room to drift start the thing back. Refused to start. Get to the end of the road, and I had my tools with me, pulled the spark plug out, and I wasn't getting spark. And just I didn't really have enough tools and stuff at the time to really dive in like I wanted to. But I did a little bit of finagling around, just kind of following the circuit. It's like, well, let's look at this stupid stuff first. Is the spark plug wire still attached to the coil? And as soon as I followed it up and I saw where the coil was mounted on the bike, I looked down. There's a little tiny ground wire that comes off the one side of the coil and grounds it to the frame. Well, guess what? It was sitting there rubbing right against the side of the gas tank, and it had broke. Yep. And that's what the issue was. I had enough junk laying around to cut the wire, twist it together, tape it on there for now. Bam, I had spark again. So I think it will be beneficial, if you start with that. If you don't have spark, well, let's just trace the system. Just look at your spark plug wire. Is it still connected? Is there any phase, any breakage in it? Obviously, it's going to be hard to do a volt test on electrical component out in the middle of the woods unless you have a voltmeter on you.
So I don't carry a voltmeter, but I was in Ace Hardware and found one of those little pin test lights.
Yeah.
Super lightweight. It's got like a 3-foot lead on it, and you can test, especially on more modern bikes. Are you even getting voltage to your pins? For some more specific stuff, and that goes into just checking the basics. Check your fuses.
Yeah, that's a big one too.
Check to see if your battery connections are still connected, because especially on big thumpers, they vibrate a lot. It's pretty easy for stuff to back off over time, and you can end up really losing out on a whole day of riding because your positive terminal nut came loose on your bike.
Yep. I think that happened to Fred one time too. I believe like his ground wire on his battery had come apart.
Or your frame ground if you have a bike that well, actually most of them are frame ground. I think not many of them all run a negative wire all the way back to the main battery, but I know on KTMs, most of them are frame ground. If you have an issue with that, it's going to cause a lot of problems. But I really like the concept of keeping it simple. A lot of times it is something simple. If it ran great and then suddenly it won't run, chances of it being something timing or mechanical related are pretty slim.
Yeah, you're going to know.
Breaks while you're riding along, which is rarity.
I know on my GPX, I was headed down to meet a bunch of guys on Canaan Loop and ride, and I got on Snake Road, and going out along the very end, I started down in a 12 mile actually, and I got right in the worst spot you possibly could down in there, and it just shut off. And I'm like, well, that was kind of weird, but I was able to turn the key on, and I could not hear the fuel pump prime. So I figured, well, all right, let's start with that, because there should be obviously something's telling it to not kick on. And I was able to kind of look and see, and the fuse was blowed for the fuel pump. Okay, well, and part of me should have stopped and thought, all right, well, what made the fuse pop for the fuse?
I'm glad you said it, because I was about to say it, is if your bike blows a fuse out of nowhere,
there's a reason why.
To replace the fuse and go on, chances are you've got a positive wire or something grounding itself out to the frame somewhere along the line.
So unfortunately, at the time, I didn't think about that. So I just swapped the fuse over, hit the key on, fuel pump kicks on. Started the bike, went maybe another mile, died again. So I pulled over. Obviously, I've got an issue with the fuel pump going on. The spare fuse I had was blowed. I'm like, all right, well, let's figure out and dive into this a little bit further and see what I can see. Well, as I was kind of going through the wiring harness, I touched the fuel pump relay, and it was smoking hot.
Yep.
So took it out, and you could shake it, and I could hear like pieces kind of vibrating around the side. So this relay is no good, and it was, overheated. It blew itself apart. So I get to looking on the bike. I'm like, well, I don't have a fuel pump relay spare in here with me, but I was able to kind of look through the wiring harness, and well, guess what? The blinker relay was the same part number, the same pins and everything as what the fuel pump relay was. Well, I'd rather have a running bike than having blinkers at this time. So I was able to swap the relay over, and that's what it was. The relay, it was bad itself, and kept blowing the fuses.
Same goes for KTM guys. I know on mine, the headlight relay and probably the blinker relay, like you said, is identical to the fuel pump relay, and that's done, intentionally. So if you run into issues like that, you can swap over. But like I said, I'm glad you said something. If your bike blows a fuse, chances are it blew it for a reason, and it's not as simple as just slap a new one in there and hit the road. On the subject of electrical stuff, I carry, I don't know, probably 4 feet of some gauge of wire that's, bundled up, rolled up, and it just lives under the seat of my bike.
You know what I think that stems from? Because I do the same thing. We're both old school Jeep Cherokee guys.
Yep.
So we always had to have spare wiring for fans and everything else.
Yeah, there's been more than one instance of jumping the auxiliary fan relay with speaker wire.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Been there, done that.
Yeah, but it weighs almost nothing. It takes up virtually no room, and it's indispensable when you're out there. Another thing too is if you've got some accessories that are cheap or you don't really care about, like a little cigarette lighter, plug your phone into or whatever.
You
need it. If you need it, use it.
Yeah, be willing to sacrifice stuff off your bike.
Or your bike.
You got to have a little bit of MacGyver in you sometimes to get yourself out of situations. That's the most important thing to have in your mindset.
Yep.
Like you said,
go ahead.
No, you go.
Another thing you talked about MacGyver. Another thing is just trying to keep a level head. It's stressful. Chances are when something goes wrong, especially if you've been doing more hardcore stuff, you're already hot, you're sweaty, wore out, fatigued. Your bike starts acting up, and your mind immediately starts to go to the dark place of, I treat this thing like a queen, and every time I take it out, it just spits on me and won't run right. And I only get 2 days a week I can go out and have fun. And keeping a level head and like taking a step back and assessing the situation is probably the best first step that you could take. My bike was running great, and now when I put the kickstand down, it dies.
Yeah.
Well, logic dictates I would start with your kickstand switch. Same way with, it'll start and it'll crank. And if I hold the kill switch like in just the right position, it'll start and run. Well, I would start with your kill switch. And that's where having a little bit of spare wire comes into play. Because especially on bikes that have the little pin connectors and stuff, you can just jumper those pins, like for a kickstand switch or a safety switch, or if you got a bike that has a interlock switch for the clutch, same deal. You can jump that. The circuit doesn't know that the switch isn't there anymore. All it knows that circuit's closed, the loop's closed, and your bike will, you're good to go.
Yeah, something else I would say too, if you run into this situation where you've waterlogged your bike or you've had to kind of MacGyver it to get it running again, don't be the guy that continues to ride with the group for another 180 miles. Don't be that dude. It's in your best interest to probably go ahead and go home as quickly as you can and reassess your bike, reassess your situation. I can see if you're like on a big ride, like say you're 4 states away and you've dedicated your entire week to doing that ride, I might be able to see that where you can continue on, especially if it's something stupid like a relay, if you use something really quick. But if it's some kind of bigger issue and you keep blowing fuses and blowing relays and you're having trouble figuring out where it's at, don't be the guy that keeps on going. Take time, get back to your base camp, hotel, cabin, home, whatever, and tear the thing down and try to figure out what the issue is.
You can ask our good buddy Arthur Punsack about riding around for at least a solid month, if not more, with a water pump outlet that I JB welded up in Albright. I welded it, held it, baby.
Yeah, don't be that guy too that you do a quick little trail fix and your trail fix becomes the permanent fix. Fix the thing right when you're back at your house or what have you. But yeah, those are great tips. I think carry spare fuses. If you do have a bike that has a relay that's not the same as the other ones, or even if you do, just carry one spare relay like that. It's light, it's easy to throw into a bag. Spare wires. The things that are dedicated to your bike that are failure points, like you said with the KTMs and the fuel connector O-rings and the little fuel filter screen.
I was just about to say, for you KTM guys, a multi-pack of those little tiny rice grain size fuel filters doesn't cost very much money. I always carry some with me. You should be changing them every 50 hours, just as good peace of mind. The screens on those things are so fine, and fuel in this state is so dirty that it really doesn't take much to clog them up. And your bike can get really weird intermittent stalling issues, hard starts, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's just cheap insurance.
I see a quick comment from Tom King saying, carry a small paper clip. That's a great piece of advice because it's very easy to jumper something out with a paper clip if you have some issues there.
Or, and I've seen it done not on bikes, but on like out wheeling, is using a piece of barbed wire to jumper a set of contacts. I've seen that done before.
Yeah, whatever it takes to get you out. That's another great piece of advice. Use your environment. There's probably something laying around that you can use, and this is something we're going to get into here in just a few minutes. But you know, I've seen situations like that where, oh crap, we're broke down. I don't have any wiring. I don't have what I need here, and you just kind of start looking around like, well, looky here. There's a 94 S10 over the hillside that's still kind of all together. Well, it's got some wiring inside, some speaker wire. Let's rob this out of it.
You'd be amazed at the junk you'll find out there. I remember when I JB welded AJ's water pump outlet, I was looking for something to mix JB weld on, and I was like, well, it's got to be clean, because I even went through the trouble of getting a little gasoline out of my tank and cleaning the surface after I'd filed it with a Leatherman, and there, shining in the light, was a nice little Bush Light can I could cut open, wipe clean, mix JB weld on it, and use part of the can to spread it on there, and it worked perfect.
Let's dive into that as far as like a breakage. So say you crash and you've broken something. And this is, I've seen a couple of these instances just firsthand because, you know, obviously with as much riding as we've done, things are bound to happen. You're going to see things. And that, for example, if you've knocked a hole in a case, you've knocked a hole in a side cover, valve cover. I know we saw it on, I think it was one of the BDR videos with one of the big BMWs, you know, cylinder head sticking out to the side, and they knocked a hole in the valve cover and it's leaking oil out. So what did they find? They found a Bush Light can that was laying in the woods, was able to cut it in half, unroll it. You have a nice thin piece of aluminum now, and they were able to JB weld it over the hole, and it held enough to get them out of the woods. So number one other pack or thing to have in your tool pack, JB weld. It goes
always. You can carry traditional JB weld. You can carry the quick stick or quick steel stuff. They make this stuff called pig putty. That's
the same
thing that works really, really well. That to me is a must-have.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I punched a hole in the case of my Kawasaki.
Yep.
Luckily, it was one of the outer covers. I was going up Oil Wall Hollow with Fred, much less experienced than I am now. Hesitated, laid it down on the clippings, and punched a hole in the case. And you know that's it for that day of riding. So there goes, you know, $150 for that engine side cover, cover the stator and all that junk and everything else. And you know, if I'd have had some JB weld, cleaned it up and kept going.
Well, we were able to do that on your KLX down at Brandywine when you injured your shoulder that one time too. Knocked a small little hole, was able to JB weld that back together.
Yep, that and replaced it. It completely squished and annihilated an O-ring too for one of the timing plugs.
Yeah,
and I remember, I think it was you making one out of black tape.
Yep, that's wrapped the threads.
Everybody should carry too.
Yeah, we wrapped the threads with electrical tape to kind of simulate an O-ring. That's basic stuff you should have. You know, spare wiring, fuses, like we talked about. Electrical tape will save you a lot of times. Duct tape and JB.
Yeah, we'll talk about the other use for electrical tape in the world of splints.
Yeah,
shortly.
Yeah, that's coming up too.
I've seen people carry spare levers and stuff like that. Of course, I run full wrap handguards, as do most people in the group. So that really mitigates your risk of something like that. I've heard of shifters punching holes through side cases. I've seen brake levers get bent in a horseshoe shape. Brian Holmes and his 700, so it doesn't happen. You can mitigate that with a folding brake tip, or I ran a brake snake there for a while and had good luck with it. Just thinking about common failure points. It all comes back to our episode about, what are your top 5 mods or whatever.
Yeah.
Handguards, skid plate are definitely in the top for keeping your bike somewhat safe from the dangers of the trail.
Yeah. Yeah. We've talked about tubes and, getting flat tires, and that's going to happen. And I wouldn't really consider that a horrible breakage unless you're like me and your spare tube has holes in it, then you're kind of screwed. But
if your buddy hadn't blown his shoulder out,
he'd had a tube with
him. He had a spare tube that would have hooked you right up. So it's funny how it happens.
Yeah, utilize your environment. JB Weld is a must. Do what you can. You know, if you're missing bolts, you know, a lot of times I have a little bit of spare bolts on me here and there. And, you know, if you need something really bad for, I'm just kind of throwing this out there, say like, you know, triple clamp bolt or something. Well, I mean, I'm willing to rob a fender bolt to put in there if that's with the same thread, you know.
I was going to say there are a surprising number of bolts on a bike that aren't entirely necessary to its function.
Yeah. Yep. There's a lot of stuff you can do to kind of get yourself out of that situation. But, you know,
like if you ride a, well, I don't know of any bike that uses standard fasteners. Everything's metric. M8 125 and M10 by 1. I mean, you carry some of the basic thread pitches and diameters and a couple various sizes. You really don't need that much. You'll find a way to make it work when you're out there.
Yep. One other thing about like maybe breakages that I saw firsthand, and that was when me and Fred went down and did the Shenandoah 519, and old Lee on the V-Strom decided to take it down the Rocky Run ATV trail. Well, he comes down so far, the first kind of really bad hill or downhill, falls over, rock punches a hole in the outlet for the water pump.
Yep.
So it's split the hose and it's cracked the water pump housing, the little spigot outlet right there. And what we were able to do with it really quickly, we got it down, leaned it over where it wasn't leaking antifreeze out of it anymore. So that water pump neck had a little nub that kept the radiator hose from coming down so far. We were able to pull that hose off, pinch it off, so we weren't losing any coolant out of it. We had a Leatherman with a little file, I think it was. We were able to file that nub off and push the radiator hose down farther on the outlet.
Nice.
You know, cut the hose so the bad part was off of it and use the same clamp and no more leakage. It was fine the rest of the weekend there.
Yep, that's similar to what I did on Arthur's bike, except, you know, on a CRF 250L at least, that water pump outlet's pretty thin. Mm-hmm. So it had actually cratered it like inward. So really at that point, your only options to file clean what you can and start gobbing the JB Weld on it. And, you know, again, having the tools to do it is
that's the main thing.
Most of the battle. And that, I guess a tool could be your mind too, is like you see what solutions your buddies come up with to things that they experience, is kind of cataloging that in your mind so you can, you know, roll back through your files and pull that out. Like, well, I'm having this issue. This is how they went about it. I'm a firm believer in carrying a Leatherman. You get wire cutters, needle nose pliers, pocket knife, a little saw, and a file.
Yeah.
I've always found a file to be super useful, especially if you have to JB weld anything back together, or you know, you'll find uses for whatever you carry.
One last thing about breakages, and this was one that I actually saw on social media that's been stuck in my mind if it ever does happen. And it's one of those deals where it's like you don't really want this to happen to you or somebody, but you're kind of excited if it does because you want to try it out.
Yeah.
I saw a guy who was out, I think it was Moab, in the middle of nowhere. Broke his throttle cable. The little ball in the end had snapped off. Mm-hmm. And what they had done was they took a pair of vice grips, clamped the very end of the cable, rotated it down, and then zip tied the vice grips to the throttle tube. So whenever you were pulling the throttle, it was pulling the cable out. Now, granted, you know, it's not very responsive, not very good, but it was enough to get him 14 or 15 miles back to the truck. So keep that in mind too. A little pair of vice grips will go a long way as well.
So I've got personal experience with that. My buddy Andy Harris, for a short period of time, owned a DR250, had the throttle cable snap, and he had a pair of lineman's pliers, non-locking. So he had to hold those things on the throttle tube, and that's how he got back home.
Yep.
And, you know, it works.
Yep, it works. It'll get you out of there. And, you know, a throttle's more important like that. You know, if you snap a clutch cable, I mean, you can get by with not using your clutch enough to get home and get out of there. You Man, it's crazy how fast this episode's flying by talking about this stuff. So let's go into the last little category here before we get into our other stuff. And that's injury. You know, I think we kind of talked about this in our health episode there a while back about knowing your limitations. You know, if you're seriously hurt enough to where it's going to be impossible for you to ride and get out of that situation, obviously you need to call for help and don't try to push yourself because you're just going to end up hurting yourself even worse.
Yep.
But you know, there's a mindset that you have to have sometimes about if you are hurt, but you need to get out of there and get out of the situation, that adrenaline is going to take over and help you push through the pain and get out of there.
I know that firsthand. And we just went and rode what I had to ride through with, you know, post shoulder injury. And that was a case of, you can't get anyone in here feasibly to come get you. You're just going to have to grit your teeth and do it. Now, luckily, it wasn't a leg injury, because if you experience something like that, then, you know, that's something you almost can't ride with. You get a bad enough leg or knee injury. But, you know, even that shoulder injury, every little pebble was like somebody twisting a knife in my shoulder. And it was just a matter of
gritting through it.
Yeah, just grit your teeth and do it. It won't last forever, and as long as you're not, you know, physically passing out, yeah, just deal with it.
Yeah.
But then you run into stuff like with AJ. There's no feasible way you're going to ride out of that on your own. He completely blown his knee out, tore his meniscus, tore an ACL, etc. And you know, this goes back to the Leatherman and electrical tape. I always carry Leatherman. This is the first time I ever rode with FDSR 2. Cut a couple little sections of a sapling to act as a splint, and got it splinted up enough to where it wasn't twisting and flopping around.
Right.
And actually set him back up on his bike and had one person off each side of him, slowly getting him back out of there, you know, on his bike. But as far as doing something like that solo, you're hard pressed to be able to do it.
Yeah, I would say, you know, if you injure, say, like your left arm, where it's going to be, you know, pretty much useless to you, you get it splinted up enough to, you know, not fall apart, basically. Well, I mean, you could potentially, you know, get the bike back up and drift along and kick it into gear and just keep yourself moving at a slow pace, you know, with just your throttle hand. That could get you out of the woods, out of the situation if need be.
Or if you injure your right leg, say you break your foot, you can get by without a brake. You're really hard pressed to get by without shifting. But at the same time, it's doable. You can just get that thing in first or second,
right?
Just baby it along until you get out of there. Now, where you really run into problems, and I've done this, is I went down and had the throttle tube like roll when it was still in my hand, and it like hyperextended or hyperflex, one of the two, my wrist, and whatever tendons or ligaments run through the top of your wrist got stretched out. And after 5 minutes, I couldn't operate a throttle. Like, you know, 5 degrees open and closing of that throttle felt like absolute agony.
Yep.
So luckily I was close enough to a main road that I could just, you know, hold it at 30 or whatever and continue on my way. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're in a section like, say, Brandywine, that really rocky section we went through, you get an injury like that, I mean, that's a huge problem out there.
Yeah. It's important to know that if you are going to do some really hardcore stuff like that, I do not recommend doing it by yourself.
Or if you're going to do it by yourself,
you need to let people know where you're at and what you're doing.
And if you do that stuff a lot, I would recommend getting a personal locator.
Yep. The Spot GPS unit, something along those lines. Absolutely. Yeah. Let people know where you're going to be. There's been too many instances of people not letting someone know where they're going to be, hikers and even dual sport guys too. And unfortunately getting themselves in a really bad situation they can't get out of and passing away because of it.
There's a lot of people would be alive today if they let somebody know where they were going. You remember that film 127 Hours, that guy that had to cut his arm off with a pocket knife? Same deal. He hadn't told anybody where he was going to be, how long he expected to be there, etc. I'll at least, like, if I'm going to go ride alone after work, if I'm alone, I take it easy. It's mostly just enjoying like more technical riding. It's not high speed or anything like that.
Yep.
I'll still text Shiloh a couple road names here and there. Like, here's a general idea where I'll be, or here's when I plan to be back.
Yep. I do the same thing with Heather. I got too many kids and responsibilities at the house to be off riding by myself and potentially getting in a situation I can't get out of. So I always let her know where I'm headed, what roads I'm going to be taking to get there, and what time I should be around. And she knows that if I'm not checking in, there's an issue, something's wrong. And
so I was out riding White Dame 13 Creeks and had to call Shiloh, and I said, I'm stuck, I'm trapped. Because there's so many trees down. I had dropped down over one, knowing there's feasibly no way that I'm going back across it because it's uphill and it's like a several foot drop off of it. I'm not Graham Jarvis at the end of the day. And I thought, well, I'll be able to ride the rest of the way out of here. It's not that far. And then I go out there and there's a trail that goes down to a huge mud hole, and then a trail that goes up the hillside that goes out and around it that I always take. And there's like 4 treetops down in it, and you're not getting through that either. And it's like rhododendrons and greenbrier on both sides. I ended up being able to skirt out around that mud hole, but for a while my mind was racing like, well, I can't go forwards, I can't go backwards. What on earth am I going to do in this situation? I was thinking about like, I'll have to call Shiloh, tell her here's the nearest main road, bring a chainsaw, and, start walking. But it's unforeseen stuff like that if I hadn't had service to be able to communicate that, and I would have been, several hours late or whatever getting home, that's not ideal. You never want to make somebody worry, for your safety any more than they already do doing this bonehead sport. So
last thing that I would say about all of this stuff is there is a very awesome feeling of pride if you go through this situation, you get yourself out of that situation, and it makes a hell of a story afterwards.
We've
that's all
clearly got a lot of them. So from injury to water logging, and
let's
trying to run the gamut.
Well, let's go over our industry news segment here really quickly before we move into everybody's favorite part of the episode, it seems like, anymore. So let's go through this. Coffee Cruisers Rejoice. The new BMW R1300 GS has been announced. It is redesigned with the engine over the venerable 1200, and it has a lower overall weight.
So you can pack more junk in your panniers.
The Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 press release photos have come out. Shows that it's going to be a 40 horsepower liquid cooled engine with inverted front forks. Overall, more aggressive styling over the old Himalayan. And the question is, will the foot peg stay on during the ride video?
I've been told that they added one single additional tack weld to the foot peg mounts for this generation.
I saw some of the welds that you sent me off of the on the front of that thing.
It looked like Stevie Wonder welded that with his feet.
The US spec Transalp 750s will have 7.5 horsepower less than the Euro spec bikes. Why do we always get the shaft when it comes to cool stuff like that?
Especially with the Euro spec bikes, their emission standards are a lot more stringent.
Yeah, so it doesn't make any sense, man.
I don't know.
And the last piece, which was your reporting, Yamaha still refuses to come out with a WR300. When we reached out to them to ask what their plans were, their issues were, they told us to go fornicate ourselves.
Get out of here. Quit dreaming. We'll never make a WR300R.
Well, with that, let's turn it into our new favorite segment, buddy. Had to lay her down.
Clip. Did you run into some clippings? Did Barb take the kids? Well, Hoss, maybe you had to lay her down.
Never gets old, man.
It doesn't, man. This is definitely one of my favorite parts of the entire episode.
Every time I'm out, the front end starts slipping or the back end starts slipping too much, I just think clippings.
You missed out when we were on the way to Pleasant Creek to do our little cleanup thing. We went through the Taylor County Yacht Club and come up that little back kind of rocky road and got up on the paved section going down into Arden, right? right there around where that church is in the cemetery, there was a bunch of guys out mowing. And of course, there's grass all over the asphalt right there. Well, buddy Justin McVicker's behind me, and he's full board onto the Clibbins thing, just like everybody else in the group. And I can't help myself. I start going like this with the handlebars flipping all over the place and everything. There's a guy weeding on the bank. He's like, "Oh God!" It was so funny. Like,
one of
grass Clibbins about got me.
One of these days, we'll go to do it as a joke, and we'll actually lay her down.
I'm waiting for that day because it'll definitely happen. But yeah, this clip here tonight, we're going to kind of get back away from the so-called Harley stuff and get more into the off-road dual sport or enduro side of things. So we'll just kind of let this one play out. And I know this is something that I've had bad dreams about growing up, and we'll just kind of let it play for itself. This is about knowing your surroundings, knowing the trail that you're riding on, and watching out for those air clippings. Oh. I mean, you can see the guy passing you doing the right. He's clearly trying to stop and knows something's up.
Yep.
And then you can see the horizon just ends.
If you're riding a new area, don't out the guy that's showing it to you.
Yeah.
Because you could easily do something that's consequential out Olson Tower Road or out Canyon Rim. You get a guy that doesn't know that monster washout's there. That's over the Bar City.
Yeah. Yeah, this was over in Wales. From everything that I researched and saw, the guy, he ended up breaking his I think it was his C3, C4. Broke 4 ribs on one side and both of his arms. But
he's lucky to be alive.
Yeah, he's very lucky to be alive. Gotta watch out for those air clippings, like I said, man. They'll get you.
Yeah, everybody wants to ride dirt bikes. Nobody wants to ride the life flight. Once the helicopter has to come out, things get messy.
Things get messy and very expensive.
Yep, that's why I'd rather just expire.
All right, let's go through some of these comments here about tonight's episode before we sign off. We got our good buddy Tom King says, "Good old zip ties." Yep, zip ties are a very important thing to have.
The longer, the better. I've got some 24-inch zip ties I carry in my backpack. Great for everything from plastics to broken backpack straps.
Yep. Tyler Vincent says that the dirt around the lake is super soft when it's down. I've sunk into my boots just trying to do some fishing in it. Yeah. Very, very funny. Buddy Jack Sloan says, "Right on." That's an inside joke. I know what that means. It's funny to me. Jamie Thomas. Hey, Jamie, how are you, buddy? These are great tips. Hey, appreciate you commenting. Thanks for the episode, man. Tom King, like you said, always want to carry a small paper clip. It's very helpful and handy. Tom also says using dielectric grease on all the connectors. Yeah, that's a good point too. It'll help keep all the water and moisture out of your connectors. He also says vice grips with a bolt welded to it. Yeah, not sure what that was about. Jamie Thomas says K-Saver saved his DRZ on the Memorial Day ride. He had a big dent in it. When he took it off at home, the casing was fine. That's cheap insurance and something that's really good to have on a bike, I feel.
Yep.
Let's see. Lisa says she carries a spare start switch for KX 450s since they can't bump start. Always carry a spare chain master link. That's another good point to have. Cable clutch lever assembly, hydraulic clutch lever, rear brake pivot bolt, and return spring. Big dual sport rides. She brings the jumper pack too.
Yeah. I always carry a spare master link too. I've never had an issue with one or seen an issue with one in person, but
Dad broke one.
Doesn't take up any space, and it's just good insurance.
Yeah, Dad broke one last year on Snake Road. I remember. I always carry one with me too. Lisa also says 2-stroke and 4-stroke spark plug wrenches. Yes, her fanny pack is hefty, but it saved her ass more than that. Yep. Weight is not a bad thing if it's going to save you.
Agreed.
She also says if you got a push-pull dual throttle cable and break a cable, you can swap it over. Yeah, that's a good point too. Like the KTMs are a dual cable. If you break one, you can swap it around to do what you need to do. Let's see. Tom, wow. Always leave room for error. I think that was about the clipping clip there. And lastly, Skeeter Stall. How you doing, buddy? One of the most used items he carries is a 12-inch Velcro strap. Use it to bind the front brake lever to the hand grip. Extremely useful when you dump your bike on a steep hill and need to pick it up by yourself. Yeah, that's a good point, too. I know Fred carries a little toe strap now. It was one we found actually on Kingsville Road, and that's another really, really good thing to have. If you got a bike that's completely dead in the water and you're not going to be able to do anything with it, if you got a tow rope where you can haul it out of there, at least maybe get back to camp, that's a great thing to have.
Or even you get somebody that puts a bike over a hill or something, being able to get that around one of the front forks to have a couple guys heave on from up in the road makes a huge difference.
Yep, use it like a winch. Shannon Scott, hey Shannon, how are you, buddy? Good to see you, man, from YouTube. 8-foot toe strap from the foot peg to foot peg got you out of the woods for 8 miles, just like we was talking about. That's another great tool to have in your arsenal. All right, man. Well, I think that was a really good, informative episode. I hope you guys learned something tonight that maybe get yourself out of a stranded situation.
Yep. Like we said, don't be afraid of MacGyver and get creative. Whatever gets you to Richwood.
New saying on the channel. We got a lot of those now, don't we? I love it.
We'll have to start keeping track.
So we appreciate y'all tuning in tonight. We'll be back next week at same time, same place, Tuesday at 8 o'clock. We got an interview episode, which we're kind of excited about, with Heather Wilson. Heather's kind of been around the block all over the place with different aspects of the industry. I know she worked for AMA for a while, and now she's got her own little kind of company where she helps guys do racer resumes. She helps event promoters kind of put all the pieces together and make events successful. She dual sport rides. Should be a really good and cool interview I'm excited about for next week.
Yep, me too.
All right, guys. We appreciate you all tuning in. And as always, feet down, elbows up.
I can't say the rest or we'll get
whatever gets you to Richwood, guys.
Whatever gets you to Richwood, buddy. Thanks for your time, guys.
We'll see you next week. Thank you.